Vulture appreciation is a topic super close to my heart as of recent. This is not a program that we offered a year ago. This is new to us at the Raptor Trust. Vultures are not new to us, of course, but the topic and our passion for them is absolutely renewed at the very least, and was due to two vultures that joined us last year. So we have two new vultures that reside with us, and we are working with them as education birds. But they're such dynamic birds to work with for so many reasons that we're about to talk about. So we talked about what we do at the Raptor Trust, and let's dive right into these vultures. So the very first thing about them is that they are historically misunderstood, which you probably all knew before you came to this. And we're here to dispel a bunch of myths about these vultures. But one really important myth was that vultures were dirty and that they somehow spread disease. And this is the absolute opposite of the truth when it comes to vultures. So the first, coolest, and definitely most important thing about these vultures is that all different species of them are able to actually remove disease from the wild. What that means is, as scavengers, they're going to eat things that are already dead. So roadkill, we know why that's deceased. Usually it gets hit by a car. But they are also able to eat carcasses of animals that have died due to various diseases, rabies included. And when they consume those carcasses, they themselves do not become infected. So vultures can eat essentially what you would consider tainted meat. And they have such strong stomach acids that they themselves do not pick up the disease. Their stomach acids are so strong that they also do not excrete any traces of that disease or that pathogen in the wild. So basically, they eat dirt and they poop out clean stuff. Nothing that comes out of them is going to transmit any diseases further throughout wildlife. So they are really cool and really important for that reason. And like I said, that's true of all of these species of vulture. There are 23 species of vulture, and only a few of them occur here in the United States. They're spread out over 7 continents. So let's see, I'm going to move on to the next slide. All right, so the next little bit about vultures. I've got this really cute cartoon that is from a website called Bird and Moon, and we've seen this cartoon come up a few times. It's been on Facebook and circled through a bunch of times, at least on my feed, and it says, "I'm a turkey vulture. My main defense is projectile vomiting," which is absolutely true. So at the Raptor Trust, we get in several of these vultures every single year. And we take care of lots of birds, lots of different species. They each have their own diets. They each have their own housing needs. They each have their own pretty typical injuries and ailments that they come in with. But when it comes to these vultures, when we get them in, one of the things that we have to look out for is their projectile vomiting. And that is one of their main defenses. They use this ability to vomit in 2 ways. One, it offends an attacker. So if you are another predator and you are coming up to a vulture and you're thinking of attacking that vulture, when it vomits and you then smell this awful, and I promise you from personal experience, this really awful smell, that can offend the attacker and get the attacker to understand that, no, this might not be something that you really want to eat. Maybe you should stay away from this animal. The next thing it does is it lightens their load. So if they've eaten a lot of food and they've now got a lot of food in their crop, if they then go ahead and vomit it, now they're lighter by a whole lot. And while they're lighter, it's easier for them to take off and fly away from that potential attacker. So it's a great defense mechanism. You don't want to eat me, and even if you change your mind in a few minutes, I'm going to have flown away by then. But it is really not a fun thing to deal with when we're working with these birds in a rehabilitation situation, and certainly they don't know that we're with them to help them, and they do get nervous and they do sometimes vomit. So we we are aware of that and do our best to avoid stressing these birds out. It also says here, my head is bare to prevent rotting flesh from adhering to it. That is super important for these birds. These turkey vultures have, well, turkey vultures and black vultures, the two species that we can find here in New Jersey, both have naked faces, no feathers on their faces. And many vulture species are without feathers on their faces. And that helps so that if they stick their head into a juicy carcass and they go ahead and have at all those really juicy bits that they really, really want, when they bring their head out, they might have gunk all over it. But that's okay as long as it's on that skin. It's basically just going to dry up and flake off. But if it's getting all over those feathers, they're going to have to preen those feathers and take care of cleaning them. So by having a naked head and a naked face, they basically don't have to worry about washing their hair so often. Everything flakes off really easily, and it keeps their skin healthy. A lot of people think that they are unattractive because of that red face, because their skeletal structure shows through due to the lack of feathers. But it also makes their faces super expressive. When they tilt their head, when they move their eyes a certain way, you can really see a lot of personality in their faces. So what some people find unattractive or frightening when they're not familiar with vultures, then to me, now that I take care of 4 vultures and work with them on a daily basis, is actually a super nice advantage and something I really enjoy about them, because I'm able to see their expressions and their personalities really shine through without those feathers to hide behind. And then it says, to keep my cool, I poop on my legs and feet. And I'm so awesome. So absolutely, that is also true. In order to cool themselves down, they do actually excrete or vent onto their legs and feet, and the liquid in their excrement will dry, and that cools them down the same way sweating might cool down a human. The other thing that it does, though, which is more important than cooling them down, is it cleans off their legs and feet. So if you are going to be hanging out on dead bodies and climbing and walking all over them and using your feet to hold down your food while you take a bite, you're going to get all different kinds of bacteria and contaminants on your legs and feet. You could take a bath in some fresh water, and that will certainly wash away some of the dirt. But as we know, having all lived through a pandemic, just rinsing yourself with water doesn't kill all of those germs and bacteria. And even though they're not going to die or have any issues from ingesting those germs and bacteria from eating that stuff, they still don't want that sitting on their skin all the time. They don't want that traveling up towards their vent or causing any issues with their skin and feathers. So they need to kill all of that bacteria. If they were a human, they would be using soap, right? You'd wash your hands after cutting up some meat with some soap and some water. They don't have access to soap. So by venting on their legs, they actually, their excrement is so acidic that it kills the bacteria on their legs. And that helps clean their legs. So even though to us it definitely sounds dirty, it's certainly not something you want to see a mammal do. It works really well for these vultures. And then, of course, they do take baths. They like to hang out in water occasionally. When it rains, I see them putting their wings out and preening in the rain and kind of taking a bath using that natural waterfall. But they do need to do that to their legs and feet to keep them clean. So, as I said, their faces are super expressive, and they're going to use those naked heads to stick inside food to get a better bite. So I hope everyone enjoys this video. This is one of our resident turkey vultures who has just been giving some stuff to eat. Oh, let me, So these are some of our awesome vultures as they grow up, as they work with us on training. And this video is to show just how awesome these birds are, how much personality they have, how much it shines through when they're working with us. We give them all different types of enrichment and toys to play with. We hide their food for them. With other raptors, we wouldn't be able to do this. But with vultures, because they're scavengers and because they live in family groups, they are. Oh, this is me training one of these birds to do a spin. I really need to get a more recent video of this because now all I do is twirl my finger and he spins a whole bunch of times in a row. So they're very, very smart because they live in large family groups. They're social and they have to problem solve to find food. They have to problem solve and socialize to live together in those large groups. And that makes them excellent birds for problem solving and communicating. So on to how to identify these awesome birds. Turkey vultures are what you are going to see most commonly here in New Jersey, but we also have black vultures. So these turkey vultures are going to have featherless heads that we talked about, long curved beaks so that they can tear apart their food into pieces and swallow bites. Very large nares. The vultures in the United States and on the American continent actually are missing a septum. So they don't have that piece of bone that separates their nostrils. So when you look at their nostrils, you can see straight through to the other side. And that's just another advantage, another adaptation that allows them to eat dead stuff and not get their nose all clogged up when they've got wet stuff all over their faces. And then these turkey vultures have dark brown feathered bodies. And so here's a slide showing you the difference between turkey vultures, bald eagles, and black vultures in the sky. And if you have ever looked up and seen a whole bunch of birds circling, really big black birds, and you're thinking, oh man, that's a whole bunch of eagles all together, they're probably vultures. So we have a lot of turkey vultures, a lot of black vultures here in New Jersey. We've got a pretty strong population now of bald eagles living in New Jersey, but bald eagles still do not tend to fly, at least in this area, in large groups. So if you're seeing a single bird in the sky with a really big wingspan and a really large white head and white tail, that's a bald eagle. But anytime you're seeing a really dark black bird with a really big wingspan, but you're seeing silver underneath those wings or silver on those wing tips, and you're noticing that it looks like it has a really tiny head, because remember that head without those feathers just doesn't look quite as big proportionally. It's got a dark colored tail, then that is going to be a vulture species.
Sherry, can I ask a quick question? We're here in Massachusetts, so do the vulture species that we have match what you have in New Jersey?
So sorry, everybody. Yes, everything that is true for vultures in New Jersey is absolutely true for vultures throughout the entire mid-Atlantic and northeastern United States. So I will start changing.
That's fine. I just want to make sure.
Yes, the way that I say that, I'm so sorry. I'm so used to just claiming New Jersey, but all of these vultures are the same throughout our entire region. We only have one other species of vulture that is native to the United States, and that is the California condor. So you could definitely see these vultures flying around this entire area. And you'll mostly see them, you could see them flying singularly, but you could also see them flying in groups. So sometimes these vultures will just fly together 2 or 3 at a time. One of the telltale signs of it being a vulture, eagles will also sort of float on the wind, but one of the telltale signs of it being a vulture is that they will move their wings into sort of a V formation. So instead of going straight across, they're going to tip their wings slightly farther up, something that would strain my shoulders. And then as the wind blows them from side to side, they sort of tip like this, and it allows them to right themselves very easily. and they just go ahead and coast on the wind and take these thermals up in really big spirals. And they're basically doing that to search for food. They're using their eyesight, but also using their sense of smell to catch wind of any food that might be on the ground for them to scavenge. And these vultures have a very unusual sense of smell when it comes to the raptor family. So they actually have a very good sense of smell. Most of the other raptors, these other predatory birds that we have, eagles, owls, hawks, falcons, we know that they do have a sense of smell. Recent studies have shown us that their sense of smell is better than we had originally thought, but they do not use that sense of smell to find food. So we had a lot of misconceptions when it came to bird smell, because most species do not use their sense of smell as a way to track down food, but for vultures, they absolutely do. All right, and then identifying the black vulture. These black vultures, when they're young, are incredibly dapper. They're so adorable, especially because they start out with more feathers on their head than the turkey vultures. And of course, they are called the black vultures because they have darker skin on their face. So the turkey vulture just has capillaries really close to the surface of its face, and that's what causes that red flush to the skin. The black vulture just has a darker skin color on its face, but also starts out with these feathers that are further forward. And as the black vulture grows up, it will actually lose more and more of those feathers to reveal this sort of craggly gray skin on its head and neck. So when they are young, they look like this first picture over here. And then as they get older, they'll lose more and more feathers. And I think it's a hilarious receding hairline that these vultures have. But they are super adorable as babies. They are more common in the southeastern United States, so you're going to see fewer of them in Massachusetts, but you're certainly going to see some. We've seen the populations in New Jersey really rise over the past 12 to 15 years, and they've just been coming back all over the United States. We had lots of them. We never had a population issue with them, but you see trends as more tend to go one direction or another. And then we've got their diet. So we all know that they eat dead stuff, and they will eat dead pretty much anything. It doesn't matter if it's big or small. They are going to eat anything they can find. But one common misconception is that they like stuff that's super rotten. And the truth is they would prefer to have it as fresh as possible. So turkey vultures will not kill anything. They're very passive. They will just wait for something to die, or they will look for something that's already dead. But when you've got a black vulture, they're a little bit more helpful in that department. So if something is really, really, really near death, they might start going and poking at it in those last few moments. But for the most part, these vultures really don't have any weapons to kill anything on their own. So most of our raptor species are going to have talons, those nails and toes, really strong feet and legs that they're able to grab their prey and use as weapons to kill them. But in this case, these vultures have rather flat feet with very short talons, very short nails that are not very good at digging into things. And that's on purpose. When you are walking across a dead body, you don't want to be wearing high-heeled shoes. So they want really big, flat feet so they can spread their weight over that carcass, over that body that they might be standing on top of, and not be poking holes and having their feet fall inside. So flat feet, very important for these vultures, and they do spend a lot of time on the ground. They are even known to nest on the ground. So they're not what we would consider ground-dwelling birds. When evening comes and they are not on a nest, they do tend to roost up in trees or on rooftops, but when they do have a nest, they will put it on the ground. All right, we talked about a lot of these adaptations already, but I've got a really cool video on here. This is the video I thought was going to come before it. This is of this baby black vulture sticking his head inside of a mouse. I know to some that might not be your favorite video, but it is a perfect example of how they're able to go inside a carcass and pick out all the meat that they're able to get. And then we talked about a little bit about nesting. One of the issues that people have living with vultures and sharing our environments with vultures is that when they nest, they are looking for really large cavities. There are a lot of cavity nesters in the bird world. You think about bluebirds and purple martins and barn swallows, and everybody wants, sorry, not barn swallows, and tree swallows, and everybody wants those. Because they're going to situate their nests inside holes in trees, inside bird boxes. Then we've got kestrels, we've got screech owls, we've got woodpeckers, all these birds that like to live in holes inside trees. But when it comes to vultures, they need a really, really big cavity, a really big opening. And if they can't find it inside a tree or a cave, they will use an abandoned building, a shed, a barn, anything like that. And that's where a lot of people run up against vultures with issues, is that it's that sharing of space. So if you've got a vulture nesting in an old barn that you intended to knock down that spring and put a new barn up, you might not love it when you find that those vultures are there, but they are a protected species. So they have to stay there. They kind of get squatters' rights until they're done raising their babies. Luckily, those babies will flee with them after a few months. So it doesn't take forever for them to get up and go, but your spring renovation might turn into a fall renovation. All right, and then we've got family life. So I think one of the most endearing things about these vultures is that they are really fantastic parents. The turkey vultures will stick with their kids for a few months, but the black vultures will actually have their kids stay with them for nearly a year. They might even have them stay longer and help raise the future babies that they have the next year. And then all of these types of vultures, as they grow up, before they reach sexual maturity, they will actually start living in these groups, these clubs, and they will hang out, lots of vultures all together in this social situation until eventually, when they're between 3 and 5 years old, they hit sexual maturity, and then they'll start to pair off and start new families of their own. But they do tend to live in large groups for many years of their lives. So they go through a lot of time with their parents and then a lot of time with family and friends, and then they kind of pair off and go have their own families. It's really cute. So here is a little baby vulture. This was Winston, that one that we have all those pictures of, the black vulture when he first came in. Winston was an adorable fuzzball. This is a picture of two of these vultures as they're babies, as they're starting to grow up. So these baby vultures are covered in fuzz, much like most birds are early on in their lives, and then they will molt in their adult feathers as the months go on. So turkey vultures are one of the most commonly viewed raptor species in North America. We said before that sometimes people will confuse eagles with vultures, and that happens frequently. People confuse eagles with a lot of things. I've had some people confuse eagles with pigeons before. But in this case, confusing an eagle with a vulture is pretty understandable. Their wingspans are nearly equivalent. They are both large birds that like to fly really high up. But chances are it's going to be a turkey vulture that you're seeing. So a lot of these sightings, as soon as somebody describes these large wings gliding through the air and circling around, especially if they say they've seen more than one at a time, we're pretty sure it's a vulture. All right, so the real reason I do these programs and presentations to teach everybody about vultures and all this cool stuff about them is because they are threatened. So it's important to enjoy this wildlife and these animals just because of who and what they are. I talk a lot about the inherent value of animals in my programs. A lot of people have asked me in the past, with a lot of birds, but what do they do for us? And of course, there are examples of barn owls being really good for farmers because they help eat moles and voles and shrews and mice and things like that. Great horned owls like to eat skunks. So, if you have a suburban backyard, a great horned owl is probably a better neighbor than a skunk is for you. But for the most part, what I really want people to get out of programs, get out of visiting the Raptor Trust, and other places like us, visiting a zoo, learning about these birds, bird watching at home, is that these birds have an inherent value to their existence that we can't quantify with what they do for us or what they do ecologically. They're just really cool. And that's why I had that video of those vultures taking bits of food and performing a spin and showing them learning and interacting, showing them enjoying enrichment items, problem solving, and you can see their thought process, because I want people to understand that these are just, they're living individuals and they're really cool in and of themselves. But that message becomes 10 times more important when we're talking about vultures, because they are endangered in so many parts of the world. So 16 of the world's 23 vulture species are at risk of extinction, and those 16 are at risk of extinction due to human threats. That is a lot of vultures. And they go through a lot of different problems, but 4 of the biggest ones are lead poisoning, purposeful poisoning of these vultures, which can happen. Africa, the African continent, is a really good example. If a poacher goes for another type of endangered game or protected game, they don't want vultures then coming to the carcass and leading the way for law enforcement to find whatever leftover remains there are. So while eventually these vultures might have eaten the carcass, they're going to really lead the way for law enforcement, as you've got these big groups of vultures maybe coming across an elephant. It's going to take them a long time to eat that. So in the process, they're going to lead law enforcement right to where you just were. And as a poacher, you don't want that to happen. So you might actually poison the carcass so that the vultures that come to it die really quickly. And then there's not this trail in the sky leading people to where you just were. And this is a big issue. There are also other reasons that people will poison these birds. Lead is a huge issue here in North America for these vultures. So while the turkey vulture and black vulture are not currently endangered, their populations are stable, which is really good for us because they eat all of our roadkill. They do have to worry when we get a lot of birds in that have suffered from lead poisoning due to lead shot and pieces being left in the guts or in the pieces of meat that hunters have left behind. So a hunter might come through, use some lead bullets to hunt with, and then they'll go ahead and cut up their kill, bring what they want back with them, and leave the discarded pieces on the ground, which is common practice, not really an issue. The only issue there is that these vultures will then come clean up after them. They're happy to do so. That's their job. But if there are fragments of lead in the remains, those vultures then consume the lead, and they wind up getting lead poisoning. The acid in their stomach actually breaks down the lead really quickly and gets it into their bloodstream. So that can be a big issue for vultures here in North America. Land development, certainly an issue. Illegal trade, definitely an issue. And then there are even some drugs that we use in veterinary care of cattle and things like that that can cause an issue for vultures when they eat carcasses. So a lot of legislation is being talked about in different places, not across the board, but each of these different areas that's having issues talks about some solutions. But the biggest solution for these vultures is for people to be paying attention to them and to start to like them. And I know that sounds crazy, but that's my solution, is if we looked at these birds as though they have value ecologically, value economically, and value inherently. If we appreciate them for their individual traits and for their species in general, then we as humans will push collectively for solutions that work for everybody. So vulture appreciation is my message there. And I am going to sort of cease my presentation for a little while at least and open things up to questions. I went through a lot of information really quickly, but as I can't see anyone's face, I think now is a good time to sort of check for questions, check for understanding. And then if we want to see more, I've got a few more slides we can come back to.
So I'd like to invite people to go ahead and unmute yourselves, raise your hand, or pop them in the chat, and I'm happy to read them out loud to Sherry. I wanted to get things started with a question of my own. Actually, you were talking about vulture houses and how we build bat boxes and bird boxes and that sort of thing. If one does not necessarily own like a spare barn, what can we build like houses for vultures? How can we sort of help them out?
No, we can't really build houses. I mean, no one's asked me that before. Certainly, if you have a large enough property with an edge and you know that, there's forested area over there and it's a good habitat for vultures and you've seen them nearby and you want to encourage a roost, which most people don't encourage roosts, especially in North America. And again, our vulture populations are pretty stable. So I'm more calling for people to not disturb them, not to encourage more roosting around humans. But yeah, they'll kind of take to anything. So you could actually accidentally be encouraging them to roost someplace by leaving things like temporary shed buildings or I don't want to say tents, but temporary lean-tos and things like that definitely create structures that they're interested in during that late spring season. So by going through your property during the fall or early winter and just clearing out any lean-tos, any lumber piles that are sort of creating a gap underneath them, you'll eliminate areas where you might not want to find a vulture later on in the spring season.
Had another question while we're opening it up to everybody else, and as I started my question, it went right. Oh, I remember when we were interacting with the Drumlin Farms presented for us, which is a local rehabilitation center nearby, and they were talking specifically about owls. Mm-hmm. And they mentioned that it's important not to throw any apple cores or anything out of your car because then rodents will come to the side of the road and owls will eat the rodents. So my question is, if vultures' primary thing or one of their primary sources of food is roadkill, are there a lot of incidents of vultures becoming victims of cars as well?
Yes, absolutely. So that so two things for our audience. One, that's a common trope when talking about owls and all raptors is to not attract extra food to the roadways. And it's a really good lesson and it's awesome, especially for kids. But for the most part, animals are attracted to roadways because we've put roadways straight through their hunting ground. And it's so much easier to see food, to see a rodent or a squirrel, a chipmunk running through the road than it is to chase it all throughout the trees and the underbrush of the forest. Bless you. So so we do tell people not to throw stuff out of the car windows, and that is very important. But more importantly, we need to beware of the roads that we're putting through these animals' habitats, and what our speed limits are, and how we're paying attention to those roads while we're driving. And that becomes a big issue, especially when it comes to vultures. So vultures are very different from owls in that they're not going to swoop out of nowhere into the center of the road to suddenly catch something, right? They're going to come for something that is already dead and likely has just been sitting in the middle or on the side of the road for a long time. What is genius about vultures? They are so incredibly smart. And that's not to say that other birds aren't, but it's so easy to measure the intelligence of birds that are social and that are scavengers because they show problem-solving capabilities that other birds aren't really motivated. That's not their natural behavior. So vultures, when they've got something in the middle of the road, will actually attempt to pull it to the side of the road. And they do that on purpose. They can watch our cars zoom by and they realize, I don't want to say what the traffic pattern is because they don't understand what traffic is, but they know there's a danger, and the danger keeps going this way over and over again. But if I just move this to over here, that danger is diminished. So we've all seen vultures eating a carcass on the side of the road. And those vultures are really well aware of the way our cars are supposed to be going. And if you start swerving or veering, they'll fly away. But if you're going straight, you can zoom right past them and they're not going to move. They have been observing. They figured out our social behavior in terms of how our cars relate to each other and relate to the road. And they just go ahead and take advantage of that information and eat on the side of the road. So turkey vultures can drag up to 5 pounds, which is really cool considering they don't even weigh that much. So they can go ahead and drag 5 pounds across the road to a better situation, but they can't really drag larger things. I do recommend for vulture appreciation, if you do see roadkill in the center of the road, out of decency for the roadkill as well, if it's a safe area to pull over for a moment and get that out of the center of the road, even just poking it over to the edge is helpful for those vultures, so that they don't have to risk themselves landing in the middle of the road and going ahead and doing that drag on their own.
Got a couple questions in the chat. Someone would like to know, how long does it take vulture chicks to fledge?
Ooh, it depends on the species. So the turkey vulture chicks fledge at about 4 months. The black vulture chicks will fledge at that same time, but they will stay with the families for almost the entire year, whereas the turkey vulture chicks tend to separate from the families a couple months after that. When we say fledge for vultures, though, the complicated part there is that they're ground nesting and they're scavengers. So when we're talking about other birds fledging, usually they're going to leave the nest and just be done with it altogether. But these vulture families kind of hang around that same territory for a while. So it all depends on how many birds there are, how far they have to travel to find food, how many other birds there are nearby. But so essentially 4 months is the answer. Like, that's the scientific answer. But in practice, you see vulture families, they're all behaving the same way, but they have variations in how long it's going to take them.
The next one isn't a question, but they want to let us know that they've seen both bald eagles and turkey vultures in the sky here in Framingham.
Yes, that is awesome. And you should be seeing both of them. Another great way to figure out if the likelihood is that you're looking at an eagle, I mean, once you've seen them in the sky, you can tell the difference. So once you've seen an eagle fly overhead, you will not confuse them with a vulture again. It's when you've only seen vultures and not seen an eagle that it gets confusing. But if you want to figure out the odds of what it is you're looking at, if you're near water, there's a better chance that it could be an eagle. They do tend to live near water. And if you're, in an area where it's mostly suburban and forested areas, or you're like on a highway, then chances are, excuse me, that it's going to be a vulture.
We have a 2-part question. Someone wanted to know the difference distinguishing a hawk versus a vulture. I can read the other half too. They also wanted to know where crows come in as eaters of roadkill.
Okay, so as far as distinguishing hawks and vultures, there's lots of different species of hawks that we have here in the Northeast, but most of them are going to have a lighter white color underneath their wings and their bodies. So if you're seeing a black body, that's going to be an eagle or a vulture. So it's going to be a light colored body that they have. Even when they've got brown striations and all these markings on their body, it's still from underneath, it's going to appear light or buffy colored for the under portion of their wings and their bodies. And then they'll have like other markings that you can see kind of clearly. As far as crows coming in as eaters of roadkill, they're okay at it. They're pretty good at it. They're better at eating garbage. Crows consume a lot of garbage. I was recently reading an article that said that up to 50% of their diet could be garbage. I don't have a citation on that article, so I still need to read more about that. But crows are more foragers than scavengers, so to speak. So these vultures will come in. They're going to need to pick apart that carcass and really tear it open. And then crows might come in secondarily and pick when they can, as long as the vulture's not shooing them away from it. You'll see them at the same kill sometimes if it's a really large animal. But they kind of have to wait until the vultures are finished, or they have to mob the vulture to make it go away. But they're not really, they're not what we call primary scavengers. So they're not really responsible for cleaning up a large amount of what has been left on roadways and things like that. They are really good at getting rid of small animals that were left there.
Those are all the questions we have currently. Again, invite anybody to unmute themselves or continue to post in the chat if you've got a question. I don't know about everybody else, but I know I'd love to see some more vultures.
Well, here I'm going to go ahead and share my next slide. So this one, I'm always nervous about sharing. This is an explanation of lead poisoning and the use of lead shot, and basically how it happens and how it's different from non-lead. So we've gotten into that portion of this presentation where I'll explain one of the issues that is plaguing the vultures here in the United States, and try to tell you what we think we can do about it. So as I said, if a hunter goes out and is hunting, they they'll dissect their kill in the field, they'll take what they need of it, and they'll leave the remainder out in the field. And that is an okay practice. There's no issue with that. If you're using non-lead ammunition, then for the most part, the bullet will go straight through the animal. And you'll either have a bullet that's left on the ground in the woods, or maybe it'll be lodged into some part of the flesh. It doesn't really matter. Those bullets don't tend to shatter. And even if they're ingested, they'll probably pass through another animal without causing any issue. Lead shot is different because lead is a really soft metal. So when that bullet hits an animal, the lead actually shatters into pieces, and those pieces scatter throughout that portion of the animal that was shot. So let's say a shoulder or something like that. So now that meat has bits of lead throughout it. So you're probably not going to take that little portion of it home with you, because you don't want your family to eat that either. So that's going to be part of what you're leaving behind. It might also get into the guts of the animal, and you're going to leave that behind also. Because of the way that breaks up, it's difficult for a hunter to then go through and remove that bullet from the scene as well, which again is not something you would normally do. So basically these little fragments of lead are left there in the environment and left buried in meat that vultures and other animals are interested in eating. And then they get consumed by those animals, and then they cause lead poisoning. So I didn't really understand this until it was explained to me by a hunter. I am clearly not a hunter. I am a city girl. How I got into birds is a whole long story. But I didn't really know anything about this until someone shared with me this photograph, and this is the photograph that helped everything make sense. So this is called ballistic gelatin. This was basically just a trial. They shot a few bullets through this gelatin to see what happens to those bullets, and then they x-rayed the gelatin so you could see what was going on inside of it. So basically lead shatters, it fragments, and then you can't really remove it from the animal, and then it gets eaten. So that's that situation. And the argument there is if we can get more hunters to buy non-lead ammunition, then we would have less of this particular issue. That's as non-political as I can make it. And that's as much as I understand of that situation. And then I've got a slide here with some sources and additional resources. Like I said, these vultures being endangered in lots of other countries is a big issue, not just for the individual vultures and their species, but also for the economies of some of these countries. These vultures provide a really important service, cleaning up dead things and cleaning up that environment. So to have to pay for all of those things to then be hauled off and disposed of properly and sanitarily would cost billions of dollars annually for some of these countries, the United States included. So their survival is super important to us because we love them, but also super important to us because they play a really important role in our ecology. And these are some other resources where you can go to learn more about vultures and also learn more about what people are doing to help try to protect them. I have another question that came through on the chat. Thank you, Nancy. It's how long do vultures live in the wild? So they can live, it all depends on the species. So our turkey vultures and black vultures, which are the ones I studied up on for the evening, they can live into their 20s in the wild. In captivity, they can live nearly twice as long. So at Raptor Trust, we have a vulture living with us, a turkey vulture who's 33 years old. That's quite old for one of these birds. There's a lot of things that can happen in natural wildlife, predators, competition, taking care of kids can take a couple years off your life. And none of those things are really issues when they are living in captivity. So in the wild, 20 years is a pretty old vulture. They've done a good job for themselves. They could get up to older than that. They could get up into their later 20s. But in captivity, they can live nearly twice as long. I don't have a strict answer for you because bird longevity is a really funky thing. You lose a lot of birds in their first year of life. You lose a bunch more in the next few years of their life. And then once they've reached adulthood and sexual maturity, they tend to live for a fairly long time. So averages don't work out all that well because once you take into account all those birds that you lose in their first year of life, it brings the average down a whole bunch for everybody else. But once they reach adulthood, 20 is a pretty good age for a vulture in the wild.
My sister, just sort of as a side note, my sister works with birds, has done for a little bit, just in the environment in general. And I'm trying to remember the name of the place that she works with, but she said it houses the oldest vulture in the world. His name is Orville, and he is 42. Drumlin Farm. It's at Drumlin Farm. So, which also Orville is probably up there with Winston in terms of excellent vulture names.
Thank you. We have Winston, Virgil, Templeton, and Turk. Yep. And Orville is a fantastic name for a vulture. I wish I had thought of that. And I think that what she means is the oldest, it must be a turkey vulture living in captivity. So
yeah, turkey vulture.
Yeah, other species of vulture, some of the species on the African continent can live a lot of years. They can get really, really, really old. And some of them don't even reach maturity until their teen years. So they can't reproduce until they reach maturity. So there's some old vultures in the world, but when it comes to turkey vultures, that's really cool. I did not realize that there was one living at 43 years old. That makes me happy because I love my babies and I would love for them to live that long.
How old are yours?
I just clearly am never going to retire.
I'm sure you told me, but I've forgotten. How old are Winston and Virgil again?
Winston and Turk, our two youngest, are only 1 year old. And then Templeton and Virgil are in their 30s. Virgil, I think, is 33, and Templeton, I think, is 30. Their ages change every year, so I can't keep up.
I have the same problem.
We have 50 resident birds, and everyone gets older every single year.
I always like to ask our presenters, you know, if we walk away with one thing tonight, what's the one thing that we should not forget?
That vultures can be cute. And I mean that sincerely. I'm actually even going to see if I can go back and get to that video to play that for you one more time at the end here. It is so important to me that people understand that vultures are cute. And that's such a thing that we shy away from now when we talk about environmental education and we talk about animal education and animal ambassadors. We try not to anthropomorphize, right? We try to make them their own thing, and humans are different, and we separate everything and we keep everything as scientific as possible. But the truth is that if you want to affect change, you have to touch people's hearts, and you have to get them interested in that animal. Pandas are adorable, right? Everybody cares about pandas now. Everybody learned about them growing up. And so vultures are the new panda. They're super important. And if I can convince everybody by showing off these vultures that live with us, by explaining how awesome their adaptations are and their personalities are, then hopefully I can inspire people to care about them and help protect them in the wild. So thank you everybody for your kind words in the chat. I will